Hey everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Hammer Down Ranked. Now today we are ranking the albums of my favourite ever supergroup, Sixx A.M. Now if you haven't heard Sixx A.M before, you need to go and check out their albums. If you've clicked on this video, you probably have heard of them. So just to give you a bit of context, the band is made up of three very important individuals in the music industry. On bass, Nikki Sixx, of course famous for Motley Crue, DJ Ashba, who was the guitarist with Guns N' Roses for many years, and James Michael. James was a successful producer who's worked with everybody from Kelly Clarkson, Alanis Morissette, to bands like Papa Roach, Meat Loaf, Scorpions, and of course Motley Crue, which I assume is probably how we met the guys. I have no idea. So Sixx A.M. was formed to write initially an album for Nikki Sixx's autobiography, The Heroin Diaries. Sixx A.M. are one of my favourite bands. I only ever got the opportunity to saw them once, and they were absolutely fantastic. I saw them at Download Festival 2016. We're going to come back to that later on in the video. But today we're going to be ranking the 5 studio albums that Sixx A.M. released over the course of their 15-year career. Starting with number 5, The Heroin Diaries from 2007, the debut album. The album that kicked it all off. So the band was formed with the idea of this record that they were working on running alongside an autobiography of Nikki Sixx called The Heroin Diaries. So this album's full-length title was The Heroin Diaries Soundtrack. So these are songs that run alongside Nikki's struggle with addiction. So they played their first ever show on the 16th of July 2007. You may have realised I haven't mentioned a drummer yet. Well, they ended up recruiting Glenn Sobel of Beautiful Creatures, which was another band that DJ Ashba was very involved with. This album got to 26 in the US Billboard 200 charts and reached number 70 over here in the UK. So at this point, the band never really expressed any interest for touring and said that wasn't really what the project was about. But they were so popular after this debut album, they put out a poll for people to vote which cities they'd like them to do a national tour in, and they did a tour all across the US to celebrate that record. They were then involved in Crew Fest with bands like Buckcherry, Papa Roach, and Trapped. This is the only album that I think is below par from the other 4. The other 4, I found it incredibly difficult to choose which order to put them in. This album was quite obviously my least favourite record. Because it runs alongside the autobiography, I don't think the individual songs are as good because they're not written as songs, they're written to accompany bits of text. I don't know why that makes them, in my head, not as good, but I just don't think that the magic of this album is as good as the later stuff. A couple of the songs on there feel a little bit weak, and there's certainly quite a lot of filler in this album, a lot of filler material. But the rest of the album's absolutely exceptional. However, this album does have one of the most famous and successful tracks from Sixx A.M, Life is Beautiful, and that is definitely the highlight song of the album. Now, on to the other 4, because for the rest of these records, it has been extremely hard to pick. Number 4, Modern Vintage, released in 2014. As I mentioned, massive step up here. This album made it to number 20 in the US Billboard charts and number 69 here in the UK. The first song that was released for that album was Relief. Great rock tune, awesome song. But the whole album was massively overshadowed by the incredible Stars. Probably one of the best songs Sixx A.M has ever released, certainly one of the most popular. It's amassed nearly 10 million YouTube hits now. There's plenty of other highlights on this album too. Hyperventilate, awesome tune, and High on the Music, one of the catchiest songs on the album. So yeah, awesome album, very much deserving of its place as number 4. So, moving on to the top 3 albums from Sixx A.M. But before we do that, we're going to talk about my shirt of the day. Probably the coolest shirt we've featured so far. Look at this design. This is from American band based out in Atlanta. It is Pistols at Dawn. Pistols at Dawn have been around the block a few times. They've actually got 4 studio albums, the first dating right back to 2008. The most recent being 2022's Ascension. Now there's plenty of songs on that album that you should really check out. My personal favourite on the album is The Way Softer For You. That song is unbelievable. Beautiful song, but the whole album is full of bangers. Under the Surface, Fly, Keep Me Guessing, all amazing songs. And if you go back through their back catalogue, songs like Cold in particular are epic. My favourite song, 2015's Gauntlet. What a banger of a song that is. They recently came over to the UK in support of Fozzy on a UK tour and then stuck around to do 5 extra shows. This is the tour shirt from that tour. It's got all of the dates on the back. And it's got this awesome Union Jack with cartoon characters of all 4 band members. I think genuinely it's probably my favourite band shirt I own. It was so cool to meet the guys on the road earlier this year. And if you have not checked out Pistols at Dawn, there's going to be some big stuff coming from that band, I have no doubt. Go over, check out their socials. I'm obviously going to put some links in the description of this video. Pistols at Dawn. Go and listen to them. But It is now time to do the top 3 albums. And in number 3, the first of 2016's double album, Prayers for the Damned and Prayers for the Blessed. At number 3 is Prayers for the Damned. So this is the first of the 2 albums released in 2016, both of which have the coolest album covers of any Sixx A.M. albums, in my humble opinion. So by this point, it was no longer just a supergroup side project. DJ Ashba had left Guns N' Roses. Dustin Steinke had been recruited on drums. I'm probably saying that wrong. In fact, I definitely am. And of course, Nikki Sixx had wrapped things up with Motley Crue in 2015. Obviously, they're back now, but at the time, they had finished their last run of shows. And so all of the guys could really focus on Sixx A.M. as a project. And this double album was absolutely testament to that. So the first part of the 2 double albums includes some absolute bangers. Rise was the first single, great tune. Everything Went to Hell. But the most important one for me, if I was to ever have walk-on music for anything, a sporting event or award ceremony or some kind of thing on stage of some description, my walkout song would be You Have Come to the Right Place by Sixx A.M., which is on this album. I genuinely think that is one of my favourite songs of all time. It is unbelievable. Such a passionate, positive chorus. What a song. Now, I've mentioned before in our video about Stone Sour that with double albums, you just feel sometimes that if they compressed into one album, cut the fat and make one really solid 13 or 14 song album, it would be their best body of work ever. Now, Sixx A.M. have actually absolutely nailed this 2-part album, I have to say. Both records are absolutely glorious. This one was released in April in 2016, and you'll find out about the other one very shortly. This album was the second best performing Sixx A.M. album in the States. It charted at number 19, and here it was the best performing album in the UK at number 30. Moving on to number 2, probably the most iconic record from Sixx A.M. In 2011's This Is Gonna Hurt. Nikki Sixx had revealed in some interviews prior to the album's release that this was again going to be a concept record, much like the Heroin Diaries. And he stuck to his word. A book was released with the same title on the day of the album release also, and you can still go and get that on Amazon now. Now, this record was the best performing one in the US. It managed to chart at number 10 on the Billboard 200 charts. Over here in the UK, it didn't get quite as high. It reached number 60. Now, this song features 2 of the most iconic songs from Sixx A.M. The positive and upbeat Are You With Me? Again, stunning song, but probably the most iconic Sixx A.M. song ever, Lies of the Beautiful People. This song is where James Michael gets to show off his vocal prowess the best. They play this song every time live, and James's high notes are incredible. There's a point just before the final chorus where James Michael does the high notes of the chorus himself with nothing else other than a kick drum to keep him in time. The belief you have to have in your vocal ability to go out and do that on stage in front of thousands of people. I mean, I saw them at Download 2016, or if you were there, Drownload 2016, or Brownload 2016, or Downpour 2016. It was horrible, and honestly, it was my favourite song from the entire weekend. There were probably 50,000 people watching at that time in the late afternoon, and to go out there and hit those high notes by yourself is a pretty impressive thing. You can still go and check that out. There's a Sky Arts piece with Sixx A.M. at Download Festival 2016, and the song that they feature is Lies of the Beautiful People, so you can go and watch that now. That single actually made it to number 1 in the US mainstream rock charts, so it clearly was a pretty good song. But the number 1 album on this list, it is Prayers for the Blessed, released in November 2016, the second part of the double album. Now, this may be controversial, I don't really know, because it did not chart as well as a lot of the other records. It only made it to number 37 in the US and only 85 here in the UK. Perhaps part of that's to do with the fact it was only released about 6 months after the first part of the album, and there wasn't as much time to build the hype for the record as there might be for other albums. I don't know, but I think it's their best record. The band had never toured outside of the US prior to this point, and as I mentioned, I saw them at Download 2016. They did their first ever world tour, and they open up in interviews about how they hadn't really had the chance before. DJ was focusing very much on Guns N' Roses, Nikki was focused very much on Motley Crue, and there really just was not time for it. And as soon as all 3 of them were available, world tour, let's go. And seeing them live over here in the UK, that was a pretty special experience for me. It kicks off with the aggressive Barbarians, songs like We Will Not Go Quietly, which is an absolute masterpiece, a real take control of your life kind of song, awesome track. And then, after you've just heard those awesome 2 songs, track 3 on the album is Wolf at Your Door, with the catchiest chorus of any song on the record. But then move right to the end of the album and you have this beautiful 5.5 minute epic, the real emotional, slow, stunning build-up towards the end of 20 magnificent songs. And this song is called Helicopters. If you don't know it, you need to go and listen to it. And what's crazy is, and I don't know if this was planned, it certainly didn't feel like it the way things were going with Sixx A.M, but it feels like their last song. Unfortunately, in 2016, that was the last album that we got from Sixx A.M. The band absolutely continued after this point. In fact, in 2019, they released one of my favourite ever Sixx A.M songs, Talk To Me, which was in support of the hashtag Talk To Me campaign regarding opioid addiction. They released a few bits after that. Maybe It's Time, which was a feature on Prayer of the Blessed. It was reworked with artists like Ivan Moody and Corey Taylor, which was in support of Artists for Recovery. They then released a Greatest Hits album in October 2022. But since then, James Michael and various other members have been in interviews and explained that really it felt like a good coming to an end. The Greatest Hits album featured 4 new songs and was a great opportunity to close that book. So by the looks of it, we're not going to get another Sixx A.M album, which is a shame because this band was absolutely awesome. But all good things come to an end, and they certainly finished with a peak. This is the first band out of any of the bands we've ranked so far where the final album was the best. So clearly they ended at the right moment. So what do you think? Do you think I got this right? Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think This Is Gonna Hurt should be number 1? Do you think The Heroin Diary should have been number 1? Where would you rank these albums? Let me know in the comments. Check out Pistols at Dawn. Subscribe to the channel. We've got videos coming every single week. Rock on.